Dear students, in the last class we had studied about frictional force and factors affecting friction and its causes. In this class, let us study about the types of friction. Okay, I hope all of you have experience of pushing a heavy box or any other object. If you have no such experience, get that experience now. Was it easier to move the box from rest or to move it when it is already in motion? Yes, to move the object already in motion will be easy compared to the object which is at rest, where it requires more force. So why it is so? Why it is so that to move the object already in motion will be easy? So observe this picture. Here a man exerts a force. So you can see a heavy box here. A man is exerting a force on a box which is at rest. So this is a box which is at rest on the surface, which is in contact with the surface. Here the man is exerting a force on the box. Okay. But there is a force of friction acting opposite to the force applied by the man on that box. So the box is in contact with the surface, so there is a frictional force acting in opposite direction. So that is, here you can see the force which is acting in opposite direction. So this is the frictional force, is it? So the force of friction acting opposite to the force applied by the man on that box, because here the box is in contact with the surface, so there exists a frictional force. So this frictional force exerted on the object which is at rest is called as static friction. Okay, so when the box is at rest, when the man applies a force on that object, here the frictional force is opposing that box to move. That frictional force is called as static friction. So what is static friction? It is the friction exerted on a object at rest. It is the frictional force. Static friction is a friction force exerted on an object at rest. That means any object which is at rest. So when we apply a force, there exists a frictional force which is acting opposite to the direction of force which we apply. So this frictional force is called as static friction. Okay. So if the man exerts force more than that of static frictional force, then the box starts to slide over a surface. So if the man exerts more force compared to this frictional force, what happens? The box starts to slide over the surface. The box starts to move in this direction when he applies more force compared to the frictional force. Is it? So that time what happens? The box starts moving. That means it starts sliding over the surface. Then there exists a force called as sliding friction. Okay, so the friction exerted here is sliding friction. So what do you mean by sliding friction? Sliding friction is the friction exerted when an object slides over a surface. Static friction means it is the friction exerted when an object is at rest. Sliding friction, when the object starts moving, there is a friction exerted on that moving object. So that friction is called as sliding friction. I hope you all have understood. Static friction is the friction exerted on the rest object, and Sliding friction is the friction exerted on the moving object. Okay. So when the object slides over a surface, the friction exerted there is called as sliding friction. So here you can see the picture in the example. This is one example. So here the boy is sliding or using a slide. So here the force is applied by him in downward direction. In the same way, there is a force which is acting opposite to the motion of this boy. So here this opposition of is the sliding friction. Okay, so here there exists a sliding friction. So, but static friction is always greater than sliding friction, due to which it is easier. When the box starts sliding, the contact points on that surface do not get enough time to lock into the contact points on the floor. So, the sliding friction is slightly smaller than the static friction, and you find it somewhat easier to move the box which is already in motion than to get it started to move. Okay, so it is easier to move a object which is already in motion compared to the object which is at rest. This is the reason, because here sliding friction is less compared to static friction. So sliding friction is slightly less than static friction, where the static friction is more. Okay, static friction is greater than sliding friction. Okay, now let us study the next type. You have seen some of the objects, attaches and other pieces of luggage fitted with the rollers. Even a child can pull such piece of luggage. Yes, you have seen a rolling object where you may have seen the luggage which is fitted with the rollers. Yeah. So here this object can be easily moved on the surface, is it? So we can easily move this object, which is, if it is heavy also, we can move it easily because it is fixed with the rollers. So here also, when this object is rolling over a surface, there exists a friction. There is opposition. So this opposition or resistance for the motion of this object is the force of friction, that is nothing but the rolling friction. Okay, so when one body rolls over the surface of another body, there the resistance to its motion is called as frictional force. So when this object is rolling over a surface, there the frictional force is exerted by the surface on the rollers. So this friction is called as rolling friction. Okay, rolling friction can be defined as, it is the friction exerted when an object rolls over a surface. Okay, so this is the definition for rolling friction. So here rolling reduces the friction. That means compared to static and sliding friction, rolling friction is very less. So it reduces the friction. It will be easier to move the heavy object by using the roller, because where it reduces the friction. Okay, so it is always easier to roll than to slide a body over another surface. So that is the reason it is convenient to pull a luggage fitted with rollers. Since rolling friction is smaller than the sliding friction, sliding is replaced in most machines by rolling by the use of ball bearings. Okay, so in ceiling fans also, to move the blades of a fan, there it is fitted with the ball bearings, where it is easier to move the parts. Okay, so where the friction is reduced. So rolling friction is less than sliding friction and static friction. Rolling friction is less than sliding friction, then static friction. It implies that static friction is more, then sliding friction, then rolling friction. Okay, so in this we have studied three main types of friction. They are static friction. What is static friction? It is the friction which exerted on a body which is at rest. Next we studied about sliding friction. What is sliding friction? It is the friction exerted on an object which is sliding over a surface or which is moving over a surface. That is sliding friction. Next, the third type we studied, that is rolling friction. So what is rolling friction? It is the friction exerted on an object when it is rolling. Okay, friction exerted on an object when it is rolling over another surface. So these are the three main types of friction we have studied in today's class, that is static friction, sliding friction and rolling friction. So static friction is always greater. Okay, static friction is greater than sliding friction, then rolling friction. So the friction is less in rolling. Okay, rolling friction is very less than sliding friction, then static friction. So this is about the types of friction. Let us to continue the next part in the next class. Thank you.